Visual effects crews at Marvel Studios will begin their vote to certify the union in a few days. I'm Rosemary Miller here with Mark Patch, a visual effects organizer for IATSE. Thank you so much for joining me today, Mark.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
So, Mark, could you describe the working conditions of visual effects workers?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for over a century, IATSE, which actually predates the Academy in Hollywood, has been creating a pathway to the middle class for behind the scenes workers in entertainment. But for half a century, since the first Star Wars, the modern visual effects industry and their crews have been kept out of that union system. So unfortunately, we still struggle with the demands of working on these film and television projects, which are always going to be hard, tough deadlines, long schedules. But because we lack overtime, meal penalties, which would protect us from having to skip lunches, turnaround protections, which set a limit to how soon you can be called back to work after you've left, as well as health insurance that travels from job to job with us, or any kind of pension contributions from the studios. There are various structural, challenges that we as an industry have faced, whether we're working directly for the productions like these Marvel workers, or if we're at the vendors, vendor side. These are, shared challenges that unite us all.
So could you go into detail? You said long schedules. What does that mean? What are your hours like?
Well, the typical shooting day on set is 12 hours. That's what the productions are typically scheduled for. Now, of course, that is a shooting call. So basically, that's when your camera crew is supposed to be able to shoot. But you have to show up, between 1 to 2 hours, sometimes more, before call in order to set up for the day. And also, then once you're done, you have to wrap out all your equipment, drive home. And then for us in visual effects, we are organizing all the data, the photos, everything we took that day. Or if you're in post, of course, you're working with editorial, who are under a union contract. So they have again, 12-hour day that's defined. But for us, we then will go home, have to talk to reviews, all around, when we have vendors in other countries all around the world, writing emails. Essentially, we may end up working, if we're scheduled for 12 and we're being paid for 12, we actually end up often working 15, 16 hours a day. I did a 36-hour day once on a show, because we just didn't have anyone else who was able to sit there and get these shots in, which were needed for a director's review the next day. And, we had vendors on the other side of the world. And, I don't have any, one to union who I can ask for assistance or say, hey, I would just worked a 36-hour day. The only thing I can do is, try to get a raise from my producer who hired me, and I was denied. So, yeah.
Wow. A 36-hour day. They're earning 36 hours in the day. That's crazy.
Exactly.
Okay. So could you explain what your payments look like, if you don't mind?
Yeah, usually we are paid on a flat weekly rate. So basically, we get a daily rate, which is defined for 12 hours, and then that's calculated for 5 days. So typical week would look like you're getting paid for 60 hours, but of course, as we just described, that's just a standard minimum for your shooting stay on set. So you've got on either side of that, hours, both in production and in post, which means that visual effects workers are suffering wage theft chronically. And we actually, created a wage tracker app with the location service, which would turn on when you came to set, turn off when you left, but you could enter it yourself, and it would track if you're missing lunches or if you're doing, extra work at home. And what we found is that, this is a chronic misclassification of VFX workers as supervisors or management, so they're being excluded from overtime, and then also, of course, the chronic wage theft.
Mm-hmm. So why now? Why now are you all deciding to unionize?
Well, this has been, as we said, something which for 50 years has been apparent to us, that we're showing up on the call sheet. We're working in the same conditions for the same employers as our coworkers in camera and costumes and editorial and special effects. But for some reason, we've been told VFX is different, that our work is different. And I think that, as we've seen in the last decade, VFX has not just become a tool or a sweetener, but actually has become essential to the creation of a lot of these franchises, which now are generating billions of dollars for these companies. And especially since streaming, the explosion of the demand for feature quality work. But, of course, a streaming show now is really a 10-hour movie. But of course, you're asked to complete it in half the schedule. And as a result, the shareholders that, are responsible for these companies continue to demand increased subscriber numbers, increased content generation, and unfortunately, the actual pressures and costs of that get passed on to us at the bottom on the crew side, because we're the ones actually having to sit there and wait for, these thousands of shots to come in from dozens of vendors around the world who are struggling with capacity just to complete the work that they've been asked to do, much less when the, filmmakers request changes or additions to complete their vision. But ultimately, that with our lack of overtime protections, turnaround, meal penalties, that has a deleterious effect because we have no voice in the job. We have no ability to push back and say, I haven't seen my family in 3 weeks. I haven't had a day off in 3 months. I haven't, but we have no disincentive not to work us every day. And so that's exactly why we are, we have been organizing underground for several years. But now, of course, with the Marvel workers who are going public, we'll see more studios on both the client and the vendor sides going public with their demands very soon. Because this is going to be this is not just about Marvel or one specific studio. This is about visual effects workers realizing their worth, realizing that we have, a strength and rights under the law, and we are now, getting over our fear, putting that behind us. And once we conquer our fear, we know that, as these Marvel workers shows, that we can win unionization and rights and benefits just like the rest of our coworkers are getting, and because we know we deserve it. I mean, do you think there's going to be more or less VFX in 10 years, So let's make a claim right now for a sustainable working environment for these workers so that we can continue to make these incredible projects that make billions of dollars for these companies.
Well, Mark, do you think if it comes down to it, will you all possibly go on strike?
No, I think that, the reasonableness of our demands and the fact that, again, we work already for these workers. Every other department that they're working alongside of is already in the IATSE. So considering we're just asking to be put on the same contract that represents our coworkers, and considering the, I think, understandability of what we're asking for, which is healthcare, right? It's a retirement payment, which would be there for us when a lot of us are inevitably burning out of this career. It's basic things like hourly overtime, so we're being paid for the hours we work, meal penalties, so we're not forced to skip lunches, which are again a federally mandated break period for employees, turnaround protections, and ultimately it's about respect. And I think that having this voice in the job and the fearlessness and the supermajority support that we've seen from Marvels and other workers is going to just, I think make this a hopefully a smooth process, just because, I think that people understand exactly what we're asking for, and we're not asking for anything more than anyone else working alongside of us is already getting.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Mark.
Absolutely. Thanks. Well, happy to talk anytime, and we'll have more victories to talk about soon.
Absolutely.